Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Human Protocol, the podcast about staying human while building the future with AI. I am your host, Mykel Salomon. We talk about AI, leadership, and humanity, not in theory, but in how it shapes our everyday lives. Reinvention isn't a one time act, it is really a discipline. And today, I'm joined by Amir Khawaja, distinguished engineer and leader of site reliability in the payment division at Discover, part of Capital One. With over 25 years of experience in driving digital transformation, Amir has experience leading software delivery, product, platform, and operations team. Amir believes that creating a great employee experience helps drive a great customer experience. So, with this philosophy, Amir gives relentless focus to solving complex business and technology challenges in a way that serves the customer. His leadership style blends technical expertise with his passion for martial arts to bring a unique style that has a strong focus on people. As a third degree black belt in Taekwondo, Amir has a passion for helping others grow personally and professionally. His ability to share his knowledge extends beyond the mat and his profession. He has shared his expertise for over a decade as an adjunct professor teaching web development technologies. Furthermore, you can find him sharing his expertise in leadership, technology, and personal growth in a podcast he co hosts called Black Belts and Boardrooms. In this episode, we're going to be exploring how AI is reshaping roles, how to train your mind, and how to lead team through the greatest reinvention of our era with discipline over panic. Amir, one more time, welcome to the Human Protocol.
Mykel, thank you for having me.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm very excited for the conversations that we're going to have today, and I think it will add a lot of value for what we're bringing today to the table. And usually, I like to kick these sessions on with something that I ask every guest. When we remove the titles, the LinkedIn bio, and everything that everyone knows about Amir, who is Amir at his core?
Wow. So, at my core, I am somebody who loves to serve. Everything I do, everything I aspire to be is usually in service of something. And in this case, most of the time, actually, is in service of my family, whether it's my children, my wife, my parents, my siblings, my community. I'm always learning and trying to get better so that I can serve them in some capacity, whether it's giving my time, financial help, or just, my ability to use my skills. That's really who I am at my very core, is somebody who loves to be of service and loves to be of value to others.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Amir. Much appreciated. And when we were thinking about everything that is going today with AI, right? And the topic and what would be adding to this conversation today, we connected right away with something that I think a lot of people will connect to it and will appreciate the conversation today, which is what needs to happen with us to get ready for the next level with AI. And that's why we titled this episode The Human Upgrade, the Discipline of Reinvention in the Age of AI. And when I look at your history, especially in martial arts and Taekwondo, and all the discipline that it takes for you to be successful on that practice, what do you think practicing and being so much engaged on that it teaches you and us and can teach us about business leadership in times of AI?
So let me start with the AI piece of this thing, because I think that's an interesting topic in general. Part of the reason is, I'm reminded, so I started my career back in the 90s. And back then you had the dot-com boom. If you could write code, you had a job, practically. If you were not yet on the internet, there were companies looking to sell you be on the internet, and people were latching onto it, in droves. It's like a gold rush. AI sort of is the same way. So I'm actually feeling a lot like it was the 90s, just a lot faster, because now the computing has caught up. You've got tremendous compute power to power these data centers that need all of these LLMs and the data that they need to run all the workloads. So, from a human perspective, discipline wise, to me, it's you're always learning. First of all, we say
Hmm.
this to ourselves, we say this to everybody that comes in our path. You're always learning. The difference I feel now is you have to learn faster. So the upgrade cycles are smaller. Your ability to quickly understand what the problem is and then react to it is becoming more and more frequent and jarring. So from a human perspective, I think that's really where the focus becomes is how can I manage the pace of innovation that's happening around me and how can I manage the rate of change that's happening around me?
And that's where the discipline part is more. It's extremely important today more than ever. It's the commitment that you have to put on trying to reinvent yourself on a daily basis with all the changes that are coming via AI. That's where discipline should come and help you to keep the focus on what really matters.
Absolutely. I mean, discipline, I think in general should be a good life skill that we all should
Mhm.
learn,
Yes.
regardless of what technology is doing.
Totally. Totally. I can agree more with you on that.
Yeah.
It really is. And what would you tell to those leaders, Amir, that they keep reacting instead of focusing on reinventing themselves and reinventing their teams?
Yeah, I think so. I try to stay away from words like reinvention because that's a very difficult word for people in general, because
Hmm.
you're asking them to become something that they're not or they're no longer going to be. So I think the better word that I like to use, at least for myself, is how adaptable are you and how quickly can you adapt? You know, if I think about in terms of adaptability, then for me, it's all about, well, what is it that I'm trying to solve for? Does it apply to me? So the two questions I always used to ask my students, as a in the first week of class when I was teaching in the university system is, what problem are you solving and why do you care?
Mm.
And you can extrapolate that question into any different part of your life. What problem are you solving and why do you care? It's buying a new iPhone. What problem is it going to solve for you? Do you have a slow iPhone? Or take it to AI. What problem are you solving? Is it going to be an efficiency in some workload that you have? Or is it really just because you have a fear of missing out, like the industry seems to, constantly want you to believe, hey, if you're not on the AI bandwagon, then you're missing out. So it's that level of adaptability and understanding before you get to the point of let me incorporate this technology now in my enterprise.
And don't you think that that power of adaptability is kind of the basis of people being able to reinvent themselves? If you keep adapting yourself, if you keep adjusting and adapting to the new changes, is it that some sort of reinventing themselves as we move along?
If I think about reinvention in the terms of leaving everything in the past and just moving forward to the next thing, I think that does a disservice to the person. For
Hmm.
me, I'm a culmination of everything I've experienced, and I think so are you, and so is everybody else we meet. We take what we experienced in the past, and it informs where we are today.
Mm.
So again, reinvention to me doesn't feel like the right word. There's a saying, people like change, but they don't like being changed. So if you
Yes,
reinvent,
that's very true.
if you reinvent, you're effectively telling them that, you're no longer the thing that you were in the past. You're now this new thing. So, but I get the sentiment, by the way. And so I'm not trying to be
Hmm.
argumentative. I get the sentiment of reinvention. You're a technologist one day and maybe a public speaker another.
Mm.
That is a form of reinvention. However, one is not without information for the other.
Absolutely.
Technologist is still going to be there.
Yeah, no, 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 absolutely. And I appreciate that angle that you put towards the adaptability part of it. I think that when you frame it that way, it makes total sense. It really does. And I really like that. When we look at the type of roles that we have today, Radamir, and especially you, that you're leading through this era of transformation with AI, how do you see roles evolving in a way that we were focused on task in the past, and now where we are heading is more as to what capabilities you are bringing to the table as part of the role? How do you see that transition happening?
So I take a slightly different perspective. I mean, jobs obviously is always the first thing that people like to think about,
Hmm.
in terms of AI or any kind of major technical shift. And this is a major technical shift without a doubt. So from a jobs perspective, I think, if I look at what AI brings to the table, You know, I think of AI in one of three capacities. It's either going to augment my team in some way, I'm going to be able to delegate to it something,
Mm,
or it's going to completely automate something for me that I can't automate in other ways. So if I have, for example, function in my organization that is, being done, it could be done by a machine better, and then I free up capacity and people working on better, more exciting work, then that's something that I would consider, but I would look at it from the lens of, am I augmenting, am I delegating, or am I automating? And that's usually the starting point for how I think about how do I want to incorporate AI in my environment. Because ultimately, AI will only be as good as the information you serve it. And it's
absolutely.
very dependent on the data. So I have to even ask myself before I can even get to that stage, do I have good enough data? Do I have clear procedures? Is the process well defined? Start there before thinking about the jobs that will change and things like that. But ultimately, yes, I do believe jobs will change. They will become more hybrid, or at least that's how I like to think about it. The example I use is, if I'm a webmaster in the 90s, I'm no longer a webmaster in 2025. That role doesn't exist anymore. But what has happened is that the webmaster in the 90s morphed into a mobile application developer, because if you remember, HTML was the first way in which you could build mobile apps, and then native comes along and so on, and then you go from there into a full stack engineer. So that's an example of gradual hybridization of the webmaster role. And similarly, if you look at the data analyst or the business analyst role back in the 80s and 90s was somebody who looked at documentations, procedures, wrote documents, etc., started looking at data for patterns. Eventually, the business analyst also becomes the data analyst. And the data analyst, fast forward in 2025, is actually more of a data scientist. You have junior data scientists, you've got senior data scientists, you've got data leaders, chief data officer, and this is again an example of a gradual displacement of what was just a function that was not driven by computing, but is now
Mhm.
driven more. And along the way, salaries for both of these roles have increased significantly. So a data scientist gets paid a lot more than a business analyst, for
Right,
example,
right.
right? So the same, I believe, is happening here with AI. We'll see some roles that will become augmented, so for example, I might want my ticketing system, just to use that as an example, to be more easily distilled into, this is noise, this is not noise, but then have somebody periodically look at the folder with the noise to say if it's done well or not. So that's
Yes,
an example of augmentation.
right. And you touched into a great point earlier, which is the question of the why. Why are we using it for? And you talk about augmentation and three different categories that you use on your daily basis. And and it's something that I also use a lot. People needs to understand that everything that you're trying to implement or roll out, like AI, for example, it has to start with a need that you have, right? What is your why? Why are you trying to bring AI to your business or to your daily life? It has to be to try to solve a problem, and it has to make sense for you. And it makes me think, because you portrayed it beautifully, how the roles have been evolving since the 90s. But are you concerned at all for the pace of how AI may be disrupting and changing things that fast?
I am concerned. So if and I love the name of your show, by the way, the Human Protocol Podcast. So I'll just pick on that as the framing for what I'm about to say. If I think about the impact of computing or technology in general, it's changed how we interact and how we talk to each other as human beings. We went from, let me pick up the telephone and dial a number and speak to that person, to texting, to now we just interact with emojis, pictures.
Yes.
If a cave person were to look at us now, and they'll say, well, we've just pretty much gone back to when we were drawing pictures or hieroglyphics. Just that's an extreme example, but I think you get the point.
Yes. I've noticed that it's a degradation of how we communicate with each other, if you put it that way, right? Because we're using emojis now instead of actually talking to each other for the most part.
Well, so I wouldn't call it degradation, but I would call it an optimization. Because our minds work faster than our speech, and our speech works faster than our ability to write. So if we think about in terms of speed, then our ability to consume information and communicate information is going to look for optimization, right? So if I send you an emoji, you will probably look at that picture and you have a sentence or two or a paragraph in your head immediately,
Yes, that is
right?
true.
Or if I write two or three words and I send an emoji with it, you've got the emotion with it, you've got the sentiment. If you know the person, you know exactly what they're
Mhm.
thinking, and now you're laughing in your head or you're crying or you're whatever, right? There's a bunch of different things. So that level of optimization is really critical, I think, as we move even more forward into an age where machines can do more for us. So it's more about not just my ability to communicate to another human being. It's how am I able to communicate to a more junior teammate on my team. So that's how I think about AI is it's another person, but it's a person that's still growing and evolving. How do I train this person? Well, maybe person is a stretch, but how do I train this machine to be more like the assistant that I want it to be? And
Mm,
that's kind of where we are today. AI in its current form is more about can it find the next best character to represent whatever is it that I asked it to do and do it very, very quickly. The
mm,
modalities that AI supports today is incredible. We've got multimodal AI agents today that can talk to each other and solve for problems that in the past were only just imagined. So from that perspective, it's changing how we as people and communities will interact with each other. But there's also, to put the more community spin to it, there's an impact to rich communities versus poor communities. Who can actually afford access to these types of technologies? Because to me, I'm thinking about, working in a Fortune 500 company, I've got access to resources that a small mom and pop shop won't. So my ability to solve for more complex problems is better than somebody who is running a small business. But at the same
Mhm.
time, that small business can also benefit from some of the capabilities. But then how do you even begin to start incorporating those capabilities, right? And I come back to the 90s where if you could write code, you had a job. So if you could create AI agents specific to the problems, you will then have a market that you can capture. And you don't have to capture large markets like Google, for example, but you should be able to then use those skills to solve for real problems that, small businesses might face, for instance.
yeah, that's the key to solve for real problems. We always need to be searching for what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And yes, I use the degradation of communication in a way just to try to spark some controversy. Depending on who you're talking to, maybe if I talk to my mom, she can tell me, yes, you guys are not communicating as we used to communicate it back then. We used to have long conversations, and the
Yeah.
interactions were so much different than it is today. And that's part of what technology is bringing to our lives and what AI is bringing to our life, which is these type of changes. And it's up to us as humans to try to remain connected with each other one way or the other. And I think that's kind of why this type of conversation is important, because while we go through this transformation and how we're going to continue to remain humans and connected to each other when the technology is there and is doing a lot of things for us not to connect to each other more and more. How can we put the technology to work for us in a way that still will continue to help us in the future and not kind of keep us apart more and more? And it's a concern that I have. And it's part of the reason why I'm having this conversation with you today and with others, is to try to find out where are we going from now. What is the human upgrade? If I ask Amir, what do you think is the human upgrade that we need to face this new era with AI?
The word adaptability keeps coming to my mind because that's what I'm doing with myself is I'm trying to understand and learn fast.
Mhm.
Because this is really what AI is doing to all of us. It's forcing us to learn fast. And I think ultimately, there's more to it than just the technology piece of it itself. I think about ethics and I think of governance and I think of risk. If you think about where, for example, OpenAI is today or Google is today, or any of these other companies that are building literally the platform for LLMs.
Mhm.
OpenAI is likely going to become the first platform where you will start building apps and solutions or agents. It's already happening, but eventually I think you'll see a marketplace for this pop up. And OpenAI, in my gut instinct tells me it's going to be the place where most of these solutions will live first. But from the community side of things and human side of things, the upgrade is going to be how can we still retain our ability to solve problems, and which problems do we really want to spend our energy on? Because as more and more of these agents and AI LLMs become mature, we will actually have a choice. And we'll be able to decide which problem is worth my time and which problem is not. Do I just want to pay for it? And I'll give you a concrete example. We're not there yet today, but I can see this happening with the AI agents. You're driving and you remind yourself, I should have ordered cat food. I didn't do that. I won't be back until 2 days from now. So you should be able to talk to your agent, and you should be able to say, "Hey, place an order for cat food," and it'll go and, make that purchase and ship that to your house through Amazon or any other service you're using. So that level of assistance is gonna change, how much time and effort we're gonna spend on the things that are important or not.
Mhm.
Grocery shopping's being just a basic use case, but there'll be other parts of it. You're parking in a garage. Your car can do that decision making for you. We'll have that flexibility. Do you want to buy a car that has self-driving? Okay, great. Then you'll have other additional capabilities unlocked for you that most other people without that vehicle is going to have. So we'll start seeing more and more of these, and I think from a cultural perspective, we'll see more and more divide between those who have and those who don't, because these conveniences will pop up in corners that even we can't imagine today.
Right. And it makes me think that all these business cases, use cases that you mentioned are happening today, right? There are people already creating agents to automate more of much of the daily task that people are doing, that businesses are doing. But when enough is enough? It's a question that I always put on myself because efficiency, we all like and we all appreciate efficiency. And I think everybody's looking for that today. Everybody wants to automate as much as we can because we want that type of efficiency brings to the business. But also, the more that we automate and the more efficient that we get, when is enough? I ask that myself. When is really enough? When are we going to think as humans, as business owners, hey, we should stop right here? Because the more we automate, the more we may be removing the needs to have humans in the middle of it. And it's a real concern that I have. And it's part of the adaptability and the changes that we are experiencing today already.
Yeah. So me personally, I'm not worried about that at all. And I'll tell you why. The human nature has an infinite capacity to expand and grow. And I firmly believe that I've seen it in myself and others. To your point about using the word reinvent, there are many people who we know in our personal circles, I'm
Hmm.
sure that we can say, well, so and so reinvented themselves. And in the same vein, I think a lot of people, given the need, there's the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Given a need, people are going to go ahead and learn a skill, practice a skill, invest the time, and circumstances will drive them towards that. I think as long as there's a dollar to be made, people are going to build solutions, and it's never going to be enough. So, that may be bad news for you. It's never going to be enough. But, again, I come back to the question, why do I care? What problem is it solving? Why do I care? Ultimately, my concerns are not going to be the same as, for example, Sam Altman in
Hmm.
OpenAI. It won't be the same with Google, and Sundar Pichai, for example. My concerns are going to drive what is important to me. So right now, as a leader of an operations organization, my concerns is very much about how can I make my people in my team be better in what they do, make less mistakes because, it's less manual.
Hmm.
How can I help them, you know, think more abstractly or move beyond what they're just now doing? Because again, everybody has the desire to grow. Giving them exciting work, giving them work that's meaningful, that's my responsibility as a leader and every leader, quite frankly.
Totally agree. And I think if you look at some of the benefits that AI is bringing to to our lives, right? It's really removing those repeatable tasks that consumes a lot of time for us and allowing us and our teams to really focus on finding ways to grow through meaningful tasks that maybe in the past, because everybody was so busy, people didn't have time to focus on. And I think that will allow absolutely leadership to focus and try to build that type of more meaningful tasks and careers for our people. And you made me think right now about AI governance. And I'm curious to see, how do you see AI governance today and in the future, really as part of leadership? How do you see that, Amir?
So governance to me is going to be very important in the age of AI. And I firmly believe we're exiting information age and we're now in an age of AI where we'll see more and more different ways in which we incorporate this technology. Governance would look like, how do I make sure that my AI systems are not compromised because of some bad actor trying to take advantage, right? Because AI systems are still software. How you think about the controls for it as well. Is it giving me misinformation, because AI can also hallucinate? So that's part of governance. Am I going to be able to give it data so that it can reinforce the learning that it's already made? So think about frauds solutions and things like that. Credit score, as another example. So for me, governance in the enterprise is going to definitely mean leadership creating the ecosystem where everybody can participate in making sure that AI systems are supported with the proper feedback loops, because AI systems need feedback loops in order to continually support and serve the business. AI systems need to have hygiene. You can't just throw data at it. You got to make sure that you've got procedures and processes in place that is going to give it quality data, not just anything that comes down the pipe.
Extremely
You're
important.
going to have
Yes.
controls in place that say, uh, we have to evaluate periodically, whether it's once a month or a quarter or a year, all the different procedures and processes that support whatever business use case that is powered by or supported by AI systems. So governance is going to take few different flavors. And I think a lot of this is going to be driven by not necessarily just the leaderships by themselves. It's actually going to be driven by the people who are actually closest to the data and the information. Because ultimately, if I think of AI as an assistant, then I've just given every single person in an organization a superpower. They
Hmm.
will be able to, set the assistant who has an entire knowledge of the enterprise do things that previously would have needed multiple conversations with different people in the organization. So if you give that or can give that superpower, then really as a leader, my concern should be, how can I make sure that the environment continues to stay healthy? How can I make sure that the people closest to the information can successfully make decisions? Where do I put the guardrails for the decisions where they can make it all day long, and then if it hits a certain threshold, then I come in and make those decisions? Because, again, to your comment about speed, businesses want to move faster.
Hmm.
And who else can make the decision fastest than the people with the information?
All back to the data. And that's where this information will be coming from. And to your point, the data in times of AI, and it's really what going to make these AI assistants or these AI solutions as a superpower as they can be. Because there is also sometimes a trust issue and concerns about the outputs that we're getting from these. And that's where I totally agree with you. The guardrails needs to be in place. At what point we're gonna jump in and say, okay, I'm taking over right now, right? Because I think we're gonna continue to see, as part of this evolution, changes around AI governance related to the data, and the outputs are linked to the data for the most part.
Yeah, and I think AI governance is going to be an example of a cross-functional governance team,
Hmm.
because you're going to need to have multiple disciplines contributing to potential issues that could come up. And I think this will be a new thing for businesses to
Right.
think about, or leaders to think about, is, do I want one type of skill set or background? Do I want a multitude of skill set? What does that cross-functional
That can add
committee look
value
like?
to the conversation,
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
especially when these AI solutions will touch every aspect of our organizations. Every single team will be involved one way or the other at some point.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I have to be careful, when I think about AI. I'm usually very cautious because,
Mhm.
if I try to look at everything that an AI can solve, then I'm going back to the analogy that everything's a nail, right? If everything's a nail, then the only tool I need is a hammer.
Mm,
And that's not true about AI. AI is good for certain use cases. You don't necessarily need a full-blown LLM for everything. You can even do it with just a basic machine learning algorithm, for example. We'll start seeing not just large language models like we have today, we'll start seeing what's also called small language models show up. And we're
mhm.
already seeing manifestations of this. Eventually I can see small language models in IoTs and automobiles and other places, kiosks even, that will be able to make smarter decisions, make better experiences available to customers and people. Even as engineer writing code, there's going to be an opportunity for us to look at creating more and more disposable code. Because ultimately, I think engineers are not going to lose their job. They'll be more focused on what does durable code look like for the enterprise. And that durable code is then going to be kept and maintained with or without AI assistance, probably with AI assistance. But then everybody else in the organization should be free to create as much disposable code as they want to experiment. And that's another thing about AI is that, allowing experimentation as a leader to take place in your organization is only going to help increase the innovation that comes out of different parts of the
Yeah.
different industries out there.
Yeah, totally agree. And that type of experimentation it's also happening in our personal lives. These AI solutions enable us to be as creative as we want to be. People can even build a website today without being a software developer or an engineer. So those are the part of the benefits that AI is bringing to our lives. And I totally agree that experimentation is one of the things that I really enjoy the most with AI because it's allowing us to be creative in a way that I don't think we have been free in the past as far as being able to create new things and experiment with new things and see how things may look like. But I'm curious, Amir, how do you see, and whenever as a leader, we're having these tough conversations with our people that may fear what may happen with AI. And I'm curious, what can you bring to this conversation today based on the discipline that martial arts and getting back to the discipline of martial arts kind of taught you as a human being? How can we navigate through this complex, and very difficult conversation to have with our people or people that think different about AI?
I mean, I land on the word empathy a lot when it comes to trying to help my teammates or try to help people that, come to me with questions and things like that. Ultimately what it boils down to is seeing from the other person's perspective. So, what does your emotional IQ look like
Hmm.
as a person, as a leader? So for me, I always believe that people first. And that's just my leadership style. That's my personal philosophy is people first. And if you take care of your people, profits will follow. So for me, if somebody's concerned about AI, it's very important for me to understand from their perspective what about AI is concerning them. Sometimes it could just be a lack of information. Sometimes it could be just a lack of clarity because their role for the longest time has been doing one thing. Sometimes it could just be, curiosity, but they don't know where to even go and begin. So it just depends on who I'm talking to, what is it that they're looking for, and just always trying to see things from the other person's point of view.
That helps tremendously when you have the ability to not only position but to put yourself on other person's shoes and try to feel what they're going through to better understand what that person where this person may be coming from. It really opened our perspective in a way that as leaders also we learn a lot because we are seeing this from our point of view and our own lenses, and sometimes we don't see where people are coming from, and this is where this type of conversation usually help us to keep us grounded. And keeping us grounded in times of AI, I think especially as leaders is extremely important. And I'm curious to know what keeps Amir grounded in times of AI, in times of disruption, in times of world changes? Do you have a tool or something that keeps you grounded on a daily basis?
What problem does it solve? You know, I keep coming back to that question because it's a good starting prompt for me. What problems does it solve?
Yeah.
Because ultimately any new technology solution that shows up in the marketplace and is getting press is going to be solving something. So for me, what's important to understand is, if the value that the technology or the solution is providing to me really worth my time to spend my attention and look at it and do a proof of concept, etc., then yeah, let me go try it. But that's really what grounds me the most, is that what problem does it solve? I try to understand, because somebody on the other side of that solution is looking to make a dollar, looking to make a profit. They
Yes.
don't spend this time because it's charity. That's just the reality of things.
Yes. That's
And
not
that's
how the
okay.
world and the world
Yeah,
works, right?
exactly. Exactly.
And nothing wrong with it. It's
No.
just the way things are.
Yeah, and everybody deserves to, earn a great living at the end of the day. But ultimately, if I'm going to consume anything, if anything around me is affecting me or impacting me, I'll come back to the question, what problem does it solve? And if it's directly impacting me immediately, then maybe I have to just react and get out of the way. But for the most part, if I have time to think, that's the question that I'll start with. And that's what grounds me,
Yeah.
is trying to understand that part.
Yep, yep, and I love it. I love it because is the question is what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is your why? And for
Mm.
people, the why or the problem to solve, it's going to be different from a human being to human being, but it's a great way to get started. Let me take a look at the problem that I'm trying to solve, and then we take it from there. Absolutely. What would you tell, Amir, to those individuals that are trying to get started with AI? That may not have the benefits, and like you and I that work with technology and we are experimenting with AI today, for those people that haven't even started to work with AI, what would be your piece of advice to them?
I think AI is very accessible right now. Pick Gemini, for example. I mean, if you're on the internet and you're using search, you're already using AI. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Google has replaced the first response to be a Gemini response now,
Mm.
right? It was optional first, but now every result is a Gemini response. So I think, excuse me, anybody who is, if you're already using Google Gemini, or sorry, you're using Google for searching, you're already exposed to AI. So just asking, for example, instead of just typing a search, excuse me, for a term, just type in natural language, whatever is it that you would ask yourself to do. So instead of saying, hey, I'm going to find the first 10 results, and then this is how I'm going to go click on one of these, and then I'm just going to go scan the page, etc. Stop doing that.
Huh.
Just in your search bar in Google or any browser you use, just say, whatever you are trying to do and look at the results. Surprisingly, it'll give you the answer in the first shot, as
Right.
opposed to you trying to scan the page.
Yeah. And skim through a million articles as we used to have in the past. It's amazing how things have evolved in this direction, especially with AI. Now, as you were mentioning, if you go to Google search, you are getting the answer for the most part right away instead of having to select and going through articles as it used to be in the past. And we are seeing that also other companies and other searches that are embedding AI. And sometimes we don't even notice. And the answer that we're getting is already an AI, an LLM already working on it. Yeah.
Yeah. You actually reminded me of a TEDx, or was it a TED talk that I listened to some months ago, where the speaker was making the case for, we are the last generation that will ever read a book, because we will have a machine that can tell us based on our questions about the book and about the information that is contained therein. And beyond that, the question becomes, do I write for people or do I write for machines? Because that's the follow-up question at that point,
I
because
know
yeah.
I know you didn't like the degradation of communication when I mentioned back then, but look at where this is heading right now, because this is a very clear example. People are writing books and using AI to write books for them. For
Yes.
other people to use AIs to put a summary together of the book. So when I look at this, I say, is this really what we need? Is this really what's going to add value to us in this future?
So actually, that is a good way to say the best skill for a human being in the age of AI is going to be critical thinking.
Hmm.
And that's what I tell my kids, now they're college age, and I tell them critical thinking is going to be your best ally in the age of AI, because it's not a shortage of knowledge. We had the knowledge in the internet, for many, many years now, many decades, in fact. You don't have to look very far to find the question to something that's general knowledge. What you didn't have was the ability to critically think. But if a machine can shortcut that for you, then it jeopardizes the one thing you actually can do really well, and that's think critically. So the question then becomes, how can you use AI as a sparring partner to sharpen your skills, as opposed to you become dependent on AI?
Yep. Should not replace, it should not replace our critical thinking. It can help, right, to accelerate it, right, as we can. So we want to do probably multiple things at once, but it should not be used to replace that key part of what make us human beings so valuable, which is our critical thinking.
Well, the best news is that we don't have to worry about that. Not yet, because AI can only operate on information we give it and information that's currently in existence. It cannot operate on some futurist type of
I
scenario.
love the not yet that you put there. So that's good news right now. And I appreciate that, Amir. I really do. I really do. But let's see. Let's see what's going to happen. This thing is moving so fast. And same thing I want to ask you, what would you advise to companies and businesses trying to or going through implementation of AI into their daily business operations?
So I think it's experimentation. You have to be comfortable with experimentation, but not without understanding where your models are coming from. Where
Mhm.
is the data living? It's very easy to go to OpenAI's website and start typing things in. It's going to live in the public sphere forever at that point. So, what's important for businesses is to say, if you've identified use cases, you know that these are solutions viable, it can be viably solved with AI, then you have to start looking at your procurement and your resourcing to say, am I going to host the models myself? Do I have enough skill set in the business? Do I need to hire a vendor? Is my vendor going to be, capable enough to make sure that my data is protected? Because, business secrets are not something you just want to type into Google or Gemini or,
Absolutely.
OpenAI or whatever. You want to be able to control not just the ecosystem, but you should also be able to identify small use cases that you can start testing this out now. And this is again assuming, that you have quality of data
Hmm.
established, you've got procedures that are clearly understood and defined, you've got the personnel to make sure that hygiene of this data is maintained as you keep feeding this information, because obviously the machine needs to be fed with
Hmm.
new information as it keeps growing.
The
And then
training
what
part
are
of the learning part of it, right, comes into
exactly.
play.
Exactly. And not just the learning, it's the people, because you don't want to just hand a solution to people and say, here you go, AI powered. It's going to be amazing. It's going to save you whatever, 15% of your time. The people who are going to be ultimately the beneficiaries of those solutions need to understand why AI is the best way to solve for it. And they should have the ability to also provide feedback when the system is not operating in the way that they know it should have reacted or behaved. So again, I think for businesses it's important to have that clear view about what feedback loops do I need to set up, the people who are going to use it, do they have sufficient training, do I have my governance figured out, do I have my risks understood, if there's data coming from external systems, what safeguards do I have in place. But just start experimenting with small use cases is really the only way to go about the AI revolution.
I agree. I agree. And where the data is hosted, especially for businesses and enterprises, is extremely important. It's always kind of the main and one of the few things that you need to try to invest time on it before you implement any AI solution. Where is your data being hosted? Is it staying within your tenant or it's going away? Right? Especially for sensitive information and business information that should not leave your tenant. And those are the type of things that you always need to have in mind when you're reviewing, bringing a potential AI solution to your business. And it makes me think right now, Amir, something that I've been thinking lately. I think we need more disclosure from companies, from these AI companies, on where the data is being sourced from. I don't think there is a lot of conversation from where the data is coming. What are these companies getting the data from? And how much is that we are trusting these answers in a way that we don't even know where the data it's coming from? And it makes me think, what can we do, right? To try to still trust the solution and the data and the answers that we're getting, but without even knowing where it's coming from. Have you ever thought about that?
I have. And really, I think it's a layered cake at the end of the day. So if I look at it from the lens of B2C versus B2B,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm going to Gemini or ChatGPT or any of those other public GPTs out there, then it's going to be whatever's in the open internet. If I
Mm.
go to, for example, Expedia, and let's say Expedia is looking at hotels for me and figuring out an entire itinerary, that's a more refined use case. It's not depending on the data that is
Right.
out in the public internet. It's actually using data from suppliers, people who you do business with.
Right.
And this is where I think the trust factor is going to come in multiple levels. My trust as a consumer is going to be different than my trust as a leader in an organization or
Mm-hmm.
my trust as a user of a tool in my enterprise. The trust level is going to vary, and it's not just going to be, the same for public data versus, enterprise data.
Not one size fits all. Absolutely not.
No,
Yeah. Yeah. I
no.
agree. And we're probably going to be seeing a lot more on that in the next couple of years as we continue to amplify the use of AI, not only in our personal lives, right? But also in businesses. Now, I was reading the other day, even the federal government had a contract with OpenAI for some of, government's branches and offices to start using OpenAI as part of it. So I think we're going to see a lot more coming from uh, AI governance and data governance and ethics around that a lot more now that the government start getting more and more into the picture as well with AI.
Yeah, and I think it'll be an interesting battle
Mm.
because right now we're just seeing the armies line up, to use a military analogy. The battlefield has been set.
Hmm.
Uh, different skills are being posted. Ultimately, I think, as always, and this is not to mean in any kind of satirical way, but I think government is always playing catch up with the private sector, and I think we'll see the same thing here. The difference will be that the acceleration of the technology will probably force government to move faster,
Hmm.
and I think we might see some of that play out. As more younger leaders come into politics and lead the country in different states and federal level, I think we'll see some of those experiences show up in policy. And again, not to change the tenor of the conversation towards politics, but I think that's going to be in some ways good for the country. But we're always going to get the influence of technology companies on it because they are very powerful. Of course, they've got lobbyists, and that's not a bad thing because that's just how our market economies work.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think as a consumer of this technology, my first concern is always my privacy in some way. How much am I willing to give up? And I think that is a concern that we should all share, and we should all have at least a clear understanding for ourselves. What is an acceptable level of risk for me? How much do I want to give up? And does it bother me if a little bit more than just that data was exfiltrated or left, at least in my control, right? So that is something that I think about.
Yeah. And you actually just kind of touched on something that I was going to ask you, anyways, right now, which is what do you think the government should be helping us with as we try to lay on, a future with AI where somehow we guarantee that people from different levels, professionals, regular human beings, have access to this same technology in a way that can help everyone. And I think that's kind of part of what the government should be there for. And the reason why I bring these questions and to the show, it's because I don't know you, but I feel like this is a wild west right there. Companies are doing whatever they want because there is not a lot of, not a lot of regulations or laws dictating the limits onto what they can build and what and how they should be building this for us. And I think that's when we're gonna need the government trying to insert more into this AI conversation more and more into the future.
Yeah, so I think we've got plenty of examples of that if you just look in the last 30 years. I think tech companies have always tried to break the mold,
Hmm.
and I'll use some very specific examples. Airbnb, for instance, being able to rent your house and
Right.
do it cheaper than a hotel, for example, was unheard of until
Hmm.
it was done. And then what happens? Regulations eventually caught up. Then you started seeing these restrictions in communities and municipalities show up saying, if your home is a short term rental, these are the rules that you need to follow. In the same way, for example, we saw this with the sales tax. Before, if you remember, if you're a business, a retail brick and mortar business, you were forced to charge a sales tax. It wasn't until, a decade ago did we start seeing nationwide regulations in America at least show up and say, if you're an online business, you have to collect sales tax from all 50 states,
Mm.
right? And that created a burden for small businesses because now all of a sudden, how do you even build that into your e-commerce website if you just downloaded an open source WooCommerce or any other solution out there? Now you had to connect with the third party, integrate with their APIs to be able to calculate taxes. So Ernst and Young made probably a bunch of money just on that feature alone, as one example. And then you can go and look into what's another example? Uber. It practically decimated the taxi cab business through technology. So I think technology is always going to push the envelope. And even going back, actually, I'm reminded about if you remember encryption back in the 90s and
Hmm.
80s, you could not build a software solution that used strong encryption and make it available in countries outside the US. You had to register with the FBI and you had to declare that your technology used strong encryption. This is when RSA keys, certificates. So if you had stronger than what is it, 128 bit, you had to like 256 bit, you had to declare your technology uses strong encryption. And there was export controls on it. So there's plenty of examples of this that we see in our history. And AI is not going to be any different. It's a platform play. You're going to see utility, these companies will become utilities effectively.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we're seeing action from, for example, governments of China, for example, Europe, already trying to embrace some global standards around data privacy and ethics in AI. That I'm going to be very curious to see how this evolves and how we move forward, right, with all these governments and different regulations from country to country, and see what the US will be doing next, right? As far as kind of the rules that will be in place to make sure that we continue to evolve in a way that we don't feel the disruption so much as far as we can expect, basically.
Yeah, I think AI will definitely, it's like nuclear energy. It really what
Mhm.
it is. It's which country can control
It's a race
AI.
right now, right? It's really a race.
It is.
And the concern is that there's not a lot of conversation about the amount of energy and our infrastructure being able to win this race. Because from what I've been reading in the past few weeks, it seems that, especially in the US, our infrastructure is not prepared to the amount of energy that we need to produce, right? And that we are expecting to produce. Because every time we hit enter and we prompt something, that's energy being consumed in a data center somewhere, right? Getting the answer from you. Imagine as we continue to accelerate the use of AI, we're going to need a lot more to produce a lot more energy. And human beings that are not very familiar with how technology works, for example, people usually don't think on this type of thing, right? People just want their answer. They hit a button and they don't care what happened in the back end. People that are in technology like you and I, we know there's a lot involved in the back end to get the right answers for whatever we are coming up, or the application or the system. And I'm really concerned because, as you mentioned, it's like it's a race right now. It's everybody, all countries, they just want to win this race. They really want.
Yeah, and it's not just electricity, it's also water for cooling
And
these data centers, right? So
thank you.
in Texas alone, there was one study that I saw that estimated in 2025, we're going to use 49 billion gallons of water to cool data centers in Texas alone.
Wow.
In another study that was shared in the Guardian newspaper a few months ago, it was estimated that in 2024, 20% of all of the global data centers' power consumption was spent towards running these LLMs or these AI systems. So that amounts to about 83 terawatt hours of power consumption in 2024. In
That's a lot.
25, it'll just go up, right? So these are very power hungry, natural resource hungry systems. And it's not just the data center; it's the raw materials you need to build the chips to run these LLMs as well.
It's a
What does it do to your ESG program if you're an enterprise that has an ESG program?
boy, now you
It's
make
going
me
to
think.
challenge your ESG initiative.
It's a whole supply chain involved on this. A lot of key parts, not only from natural resources and energy that are involved on producing a response to your prompt, that we don't think enough about that. And we should. We should, right? It's kind of our responsibility in a way to really think about every time that we're trying to get the best answer from chat gpt or an llm, and we keep doing and we keep doing. There's a lot of energy and a lot of things happening in the back end to make that happen. But yeah, that would be probably a conversation for another day, Amir.
Yeah,
Because that will be a conversation, a topic to talk about another hour just on that topic, I think, right?
absolutely. But I think it boils down to awareness at the end of the day. I think there's nothing free. AI isn't free. And the technology behind it is significantly more powerful than any solution we've seen and deployed today
Hmm.
in the enterprise. The resource consumption, the capacity, etc., it's very large. So I think as we interact more and become more comfortable and familiar with AI, we will just have to understand all the different dimensions that make this possible. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of that comes from top down, really, leadership, making sure that people are aware that here's what we're doing, here's what is the investment, here's what it's doing to your environment, if that's even a concern to you as an organization.
And bring continue to bring more awareness so people fully understand not only the technology but the ramification and implication of building this technology and what it means for us as a society as we move forward, right? Because as we're seeing the future with AI, it's we're seeing these more, the ramifications of it will continue to amplify as we will have more people and future generations also embracing AI and embedding AI as part of our daily life. So very interesting, Amir. And last but not least, what would be your piece of advice if you look back and you find your younger self reflected today? Imagine having Amir today as your younger self and the future generations. What would be your piece of advice for your younger self and the future generations about this future with AI?
So if I frame this for the future generations, me talking to my younger self, I would say the advice I would give myself, and which is what I give others, is meet yourself. And we are self-aware human beings, and everybody is self-aware at a specific level. But when I say the words meet yourself, it's go beyond just the what my likes and dislikes are. Because ultimately, unless we identify what is truly non-negotiable for us as an individual, it makes adaptability, or to your point, to use your word, reinvention, a challenge, you know? Because we're not going to give up our non-negotiable values. But at the end of the day, we still need to adapt to a changing world. And that is going to be a constant in my life, in your life, in your listeners' life, and everybody. So what I would tell myself is meet yourself, because that is going to be an important input to how you adapt.
Yeah, thanks for that, Amir. Appreciate those words, and this has been a very thoughtful conversation. I've enjoyed. So thank you for sharing your time, your wisdom, and your humanity with us. It's been my real pleasure to have you on the show, and this has been extremely thoughtful conversation. So I appreciate you. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
So if today's conversation sparked something in you, make sure that you share this episode with your friends, with your family, with your loved one. Please follow the Human Protocol and join us every week as we really explore what does it mean to stay human while building the future with AI. Thank you all, and I see you next time.